Good evening, Shalom Aleichem. We're going to continue learning with Hashem, our class on the Chatzar Yosef. We're continuing in chapter 8, section 2, entitled Death by Dried Figs. As we know, according to one opinion in the Gemara, which we'll read right now, there was a death that happened by dried figs, which is why we called it death by dried figs. But there's much more to be said about that. Let's read the Gemara one more time. That has become the custom. Have this. That has become the custom to read the Gemara one time at the beginning of each lecture, so that we know what Gemara we're talking about. The Gemara, this is obviously Masechet Gittin. The Gemara says like this: Marta bat Baitos was one of the wealthy women that was trapped inside Yerushalayim at the time of the Roman siege. Roman siege that was happening. They weren't letting anyone in and out, and there was starvation happening inside the walls of Jerusalem because of what the events that happened in the previous chapter that we spoke about, that the Baryonim, the gangster-like group, destroyed all the wheat and barley. What did she do? She sent her agent and said to him, "Go bring me semidah," which is fine flour. By the time he went, the fine flour was sold out. He came and said to her, "There is no fine flour, but there is chivarta," that's how you say it. Chivarta, which is ordinary flour, one step down. She said to him, "Go then and bring me the ordinary flour." By the time he went, the ordinary flour was sold out. He came and said to her, "There is no ordinary flour, but there is gushkara, which is coarse flour, already getting on the lower end." She said to him, "Go then and bring me the coarse flour." By the time he went, of course, the coarse flour was sold out. He came and said to her, "There's no coarse flour, but there's barley flour." She said to him, "Go then bring me the barley flour." By the time he went, the barley flour was already sold out. She was removing her shoes and she said, "I will go out myself into the streets of the city and see if I can find something to eat." She stepped on some animal dung, which settled onto her foot and she died. That's the first opinion in the Gemara. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai then recited the following verse about her. This is a verse in Devarim 28:56. It's in Parashat Ki Tavo, which is part of the long list of curses there. It says, "The tender and delicate woman among you, who would not try to set the sole of her foot," etc. Which means that he's saying that curse is talking about this delicate woman who was so delicate that she couldn't even put her foot on the ground, and when she did, she died. There are those who say, there's another opinion that says that rather than stepping on dung, she ate grogarot, which are dried figs of Rabbi Tzadok, and she became disgusted by them and died. Since Rabbi Tzadok would observe fast for 40 years, we spoke about last week how he was already starting to see signs that the temple was going to be destroyed, and he did whatever he could to try to prolong or overrule that decree from heaven, and he fasted for 40 years. Most likely it was just day fasts. Nevertheless, why did he do it? So that Yerushalayim would not be destroyed. When he would eat something, it would be seen from the outside. Rashi explained, in his throat you could see it as he swallowed it. When he would finish a fast and want to rejuvenate himself, they would bring him dried figs, and he would suck out their juice and cast the rest away. It was one such dried fig that Marta bat Baitos found that caused her death. As she was dying, she took out all of her gold and silver and threw it in the marketplace, and she said, "Why do I need this?" And this is exactly that which is written in the verse in Yechezkel the prophet. It says, "They will throw their silver in the streets." That's just a quick rundown of the Gemara. Some major questions, I want to incorporate this as well. Some major questions that we brought up last week. Why the 4 types of flour? Why didn't the agent just buy whatever was available? Obviously there's a famine. You have to buy whatever's available. We have to go back and forth. That's number 1. Number 2, how does the pasuk, that curse that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said about her, that she was this delicate woman who couldn't put her foot on the ground, how is it connected to her? Why was there 2 different opinions about how she died? One that she stepped in dung, and one that she ate the dried figs of Rabbi Tzadok. Why was she punished? What was her sin? Why did it have to be figs and not any other fruit? These are all major questions. Another question, that's sort of a nuanced question we asked, was why does it say dried figs? That Rabbi Tzadok would suck out the juice of dried figs. It seems hard to understand that because usually dried figs, by definition, have no juice. They've been dried out. They're just kind of chewy and gum-like. So where's the juice inside that they're talking about?
Even gum is juicy though.
They make it that way on purpose. It's not. Some gum has juice inside, but I'm talking about like rubbery. My point is trying to say rubbery. And the last thing we said, we asked, was why did Rashi have to point out the fact that Rabbi Tzadok was so emaciated, which means, Mike, skinny. We gotta learn some vocabulary over here. She was so skinny that when he was swallowed, when he ate, you could see it from the throat. Why did that detail have to be mentioned by Rashi? Those were our questions. Now we're up to the Maharal, page 86. The Maharal says, none of this was just happenstance. He loves to always introduce what he's about to say with these powerful words, that nothing in the Gemara is just stam. If it was, what reason would Chazal have to mention it? Right? I should have put this line in the introduction of this book, because it applies to the whole book. But the Maharal happened to write it on this piece. The episode that with the messenger not being able to procure, meaning attain, the different flowers each time was surely something divinely supervised. And it kept happening again and again as an emphasis that this was surely not happenstance, meaning that
happenstance or not coincidence?
Same thing, man. What's the difference?
Why that word? Well, is there a specific reason?
No, they mean the same thing. They are synonyms, Mike.
No, it's the first time I ever saw it.
Never saw happenstance?
I saw coincidence.
You're a college graduate, never saw the word happenstance? Fine. Regarding the two versions of how she died, the disagreement is essentially spiritual versus physical. This is how the Maharal explains the two opinions. The opinion that says, yes. Oh yeah? Spiritual versus physical.
What? Disagreement.
What are you talking about?
Disagreement.
Can we Let's go further. The opinion that says that she died from stepping in the dung means to say that her death, Mike, stop. That her death was a physical one. Since dung, right, animal feces, is the lowliest physical things that you can possibly think of. It's a very physical, associated thing. And saying she died that way means she died in a physical way. The second opinion that says that she died from the bad smell that was imbued in the dried figs of Rabbi Tzadok means to say that her death was spiritual in nature. Why? Since smell is a sense that the soul senses. This is a basic point. Look at note 5. The proof for this is from the Gemara Masechet Berachot 43b. It brings, we bring it over here. It says, which item does the soul gain pleasure from, but the body does not gain pleasure from? The Gemara asks the question. The Gemara answers over there. One would say the answer is a pleasant smell.
Body gains.
Aromas, that you smell are in the air. It's not something we would call substance. Physical. I mean, we know, it technically has a molecular structure, and we can measure it and set it, and all these things, but you can't hold it. That's the point. So it's less physical than solid. Okay, and the way you smell, the way you enjoy or get disgusted by a bad smell or enjoy a good smell, is that those vapors, those molecules are gas molecules in the air, go inside your nose and hit the very top of your nose. In there you have receptors, which hits a nerve, the first cranial nerve actually, called the olfactory nerve, goes straight to your brain. It's very, very close. It's the closest nerve of all your senses to your brain.
It's closer to the eyeball?
Yes, it's closer than the eyes. Because the eyes have an optic nerve, it's longer.
Closer to the ears?
The ears is probably second closest. Yeah. But the nose is right there. It's literally, it's called an olfactory bulb that comes out of the brain, and it's right in here. If you go a centimeter or 2, 3, 4 in there, it's right here.
Is that why scent is associated with memory also? Yeah.
Scent is associated with memory?
Yeah.
I don't know what you mean.
Something, it takes you back. It takes you there because you're...
Maybe, perhaps. Perhaps. But the point is, the smell is the most spiritual of senses, of the 5 senses.
Actually, a crazy story about smell and memory.
Okay, you'll tell me later. So therefore, he says that since she died, according to that opinion, by the bad smell of those dried figs, it was a spiritual type of death. The depth of their argument, says the Maharal, is centered on the following question. In death, which part dies first, the body or the soul?
Body.
Which is kind of a weird question because the soul doesn't die. right? The soul is eternal. So again, we have to explain that the soul has multiple parts to it, okay? There's a certain flicker of light, certain flicker of spiritual energy that does get diminished at the time of death. But the main soul that makes you you, that we speak about all the time, that's eternal, right? That continues on to go to the trial and get punished or hopefully rewarded. Nevertheless, look what he says over here.
Does the soul have an image?
The deep books say that the soul does have some, again, it's hard to talk about spiritual things because we live in such a physical world, but there is what you might call an image to a soul, and it's very similar to the body that it's in. The body and the soul are very similar, have similar images, because it's all based on the same template, which is God. Doesn't mean God has an image. What I mean by that is that the template of that is the 10 Sefirot. Beyond that is God's infinity. Okay. So, the first opinion argues that the body dies first, which is appropriate since the body is the one that incites and performs sin. Also, the body, being lowlier, is more readily ruined than the soul. Whereas the second opinion holds that it is more fitting that the soul dies first, since if not for the soul, the body would be inanimate and unable to do any sin. So the implication of his question is like this, of his explanation is that whoever is liable, whoever is responsible, should die first.
Okay, so usually the body is responsible.
So the body is lowlier, more physical, and it pulls you to sin.
Okay.
That's the opinion. That's the argument. The first opinion. That's why he's saying that the first opinion says she died by stepping in dung, which is more physical. The second opinion says no. The body cannot move without the soul. The soul is the energy. The soul is the battery. The soul is the whole controller of the body. So the body, even if it wants to sin, it can't sin without the soul. Therefore, the soul should die first. That's why he says that he should die from dried figs, which is more of a spiritual thing, which is the smell. Yeah.
Animal moves. I know it has a soul, but it has.
But an animal is not liable for right and wrong. It doesn't have. Doesn't have free will. It doesn't have the higher level soul that we have. It just has a base.
Without the body, the soul cannot in this world either.
One more time.
Without the body, the soul cannot function in this world either.
Right. So again, the argument to be made is on both sides that they both need each other. Basically, it's like they're essential to each other. It's like a car. You can't have a car that has just wheels and no engine, or just engine and no wheels. They need each other to make the car a car. Otherwise, it's not moving. Right?
Sorry, can you have a body without a soul? That was my question.
Can you have a body? Yeah, we call that a golem. A golem. The English word also for golem. Golem.
What is that exactly? A rock?
It's a vegetative, lifeless body, a soulless body. There are legends that actually, funny you bring it up. The Maharal, who we're learning right now, he is famous for having that he created a golem, and he made him do things for him.
It's like Frankenstein?
Kind of, I guess you would call it like that. But again, I don't want to use that word, but yeah, it's because it's all from Sefer Yetzirah. There was a book called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation. The legend is that Avraham Avinu wrote it down, and he used it first of all to create to create from the dirt, from the ground, the cow that he served to the angels, right? Because the angels, when they came to him, it says he served them each very high delicacy, which was a cow tongue. Each one of them, cow tongue and mustard. 3 of them. So how did we get those cows? He created them on such short notice. He created them. And the whole idea is that if you create a cow, you don't have to shecht it. It's kosher.
Where did he get a cow from?
He created the cow.
Lifestyle.
No, but he created it. That's the Midrash says it. Yes, Tosfot brings it down, the Gemara. He created it. He had this information, he had this knowledge. And the legends that Mahara, in that book is also information about how to create these lifeless bodies. When I say lifeless, it's hard to explain. Like almost like a dummy. Like he has no soul, so he kind of does whatever. He just has the nefesh, like an animal. An animal has a nefesh. There's parts to their soul. There's nefesh, ruach, and neshama. An animal, a monkey, a dog, they have a nefesh. So that's why you can communicate with them. You can connect with them on a certain level. That's what keeps them alive. Without the nefesh, they won't be alive at all. So they created this person, golem, whatever you want to call it, with the nefesh. So he was like a pet person.
We have that now as a clone. Like if you would clone a human, it's
It's not real.
But he may have a nefesh. That's the thing. The only way to do that was with the Sefer Yetzirah. Science cannot create a nefesh. You need spiritual activity to create that.
Okay. But
Yeah.
a clone is made through science.
So that's just the body. So that would just be a lifeless body, a vegetable. So you see, it's kind of a fine line, but you see the difference. So anyway, the Maharal is saying over here the two opinions in the Gemara. One is saying that when death occurs, the body dies first. The other one is saying that the soul dies first because the soul is more responsible, or this one saying the body is more responsible. Also, the soul, being higher, cannot tolerate even the smallest irritant, such as that deeply horrible smell, and so it dies immediately before the body. So that's how he explains both sides. This argument connects to a famous Gemara, Masechet Sanhedrin 91a. I quote it to you here. It says the following. Antoninus, who was the Roman emperor, said to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. They have a very interesting history between each other. Antoninus was the Roman emperor, but he was an underground Talmid Chacham. He studied underground with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who he knew from when they were babies. There's a story about how their mother switched them at birth. Whole story, very interesting stuff. I don't want to get into it now. But they were very close. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was obviously the president, the leader of the Jewish people.
But Antoninus is not Jewish.
He converted.
Before or after?
He converted, I'm not sure when, I think it was while he was still king, he converted. He was an underground Jew. And there's amazing stories, Masechet Avodah speaks about it. But they used to learn together. So one day he asked Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he says, the body and the soul are able to exempt themselves from judgment at the end of life. Each one of them has a claim to make, basically. How so? The body says the soul sinned. Since from the day of my death, when it departed from me, the body is going to say, once I died and the soul left me, I am cast like a silent stone in the grave. I'm a vegetable. I'm not making any sin. Therefore, when I was alive, I was making sins. Why? Because the soul was inside me. The soul was animating me. That's what the body is going to say. And the soul says back to him, to the body sinned, not me. Since from the day that I departed from it, I'm flying in the air like a bird. I'm not sinning either. Right?
Neither are doing mitzvahs.
Right, but they're talking about judgment specifically, a judgment for punishment.
So the moral of the story is you need both to tango. You need two to tango.
Exactly. And this Gemara goes on further, and we're going to actually bring it in a much later chapter, that another continuation of this Gemara. But the point is, both body and soul are almost like, I don't want to say it, but they have deal like the yin and the yang. They need each other. Right? There's a whole discussion that concept is from Kabbalah also, 100%. Stolen from Kabbalah. Because there's who came up with the concept? The Easterners, right? Asia. It's the same. It's energies. It's like positive and negative energies kind of thing. It's all the same ideas. It's all from
The idea is that you need one with the other. You cannot have one with the other.
Equal balance.
Yeah.
Yes, that's 100% Chesed and Din. That's what it is. Chesed and Din. And inside each yin and yang, there's a little circle that's of the other color. That's Tiferet. The middle is Tiferet. Right? It's all 100% stolen from Kabbalah, and the Torah hints to this because the originators of these Eastern ideologies came from Abraham Avinu. When Abraham Avinu got married to Keturah after Sarah died, it says that he sent all the gifts that he had to the east. That's what it says, and along with his children of Keturah that he had after Sarah died. What it says over there is that it says he gave all the gifts. He sent gifts to the east. That's what it says. It says he sent gifts to the east, but Abraham gave everything he had to Yitzchak. That's the two verses. How do you explain that? Either if he gave everything to Yitzchak, he has nothing left to give to the east. So the answer is he gave all the physical possessions and all the Torah, hierarchy that's going to go down, continue from him to Yitzchak. But what gifts did he send to the east? These ideological gifts, these ideas, these deep truths.
The Chinese community?
They weren't Chinese yet.
No, that's what I'm saying.
But to the east, yeah. It's not only Chinese, but it's Nepal, it's the whole eastern area. China is a big part of it. Buddhists, they all have roots in this. Okay. So Maharal goes on further. 87. Page 87. Either way, she surely did not die immediately. Rather, she contracted a sickness, says the Maharal, whether from the dung or from the dried figs, and died later on. Look at number 6, note number 6. As is evident from the end of our Gemara, that after her traumatic event, whether she stepped on the dung or ate the dried fig, she went to the streets and threw out her gold and silver, meaning she must have died a little bit later. So that's the point. Says the Ben Yehoyada now, on our Gemara, Rabbi Tzadok fasted for 40 years to protect Yerushalayim, the center of the land of Israel. The number 40 hints at the land of Israel because the land is 400 parsaot in length, which is a 40-day walk. A parsa is a Torah measurement of length. Look at note number 7. 1 parsa is a halachic measurement of distance equal to about 3.8 kilometers. So 400 parsa is about 1,536 kilometers according to Rabbi Abraham Chaim Na'eh. That's the when we go to halachot of measurements, shiurim, we go like him. We pass like him, Rabbi Abraham Chaim Na'eh. So he says that's why Rabbi Tzadok fasted for 40 years. Because the whole concept is there. 40 years to protect the 400 parsaot, 40-day walk from one side to the other. Furthermore, just like the generation of the desert was punished to roam the wilderness, the desert, for 40 years before the next generation, their children, would finally come into the land, 1 year per day of the sin of the spies, right? That was because the spies took 40 days. And God said it's going to be 1 year per day, 40 years. So too, Rabbi Tzadok tried to counteract such a decree of destruction by fasting for 40 years, so that they don't get a decree of death and destruction like the generation of the desert did. So this whole theme of 40 is to prevent or to enact decrees from heaven regarding the status of what's going to happen to the people at large. Iyun Yaakov writes, our Gemara makes a point to mention that Marta bat Baitos was a wealthy woman of Yerushalayim, to highlight the reason for why she was punished the way she was. Now it's interesting. Now he's letting you know a very important fact here. The reason being that, meaning why was she punished this way? Despite being fully capable, she did not contribute to charity efforts for the people of the city during the time of the crisis. Unlike the other 3 wealthy men mentioned above in the previous Gemara and previous chapter, we talked about the 3 rich men. They all said, I'll give wheat and barley. One said, I'll give wine and oil. Another one said, I'll give salt, or whatever it was, right? Wood. One of them said, I'll give wood. But she could have also gave, but she did not. Says the Iyun Yaakov, that was her sin. Stinginess. And that's why she died this way. Last commentator, the Ein Eliyahu, he writes the following. The temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred, Sinat Chinam, the second temple, and lack of kind deeds between the Jews. Marta bat Baitos, in her refusal to give charity, despite her having the means to do so, contributed greatly to this issue. Rabbi Tzadok, however, did everything he could have, indicated by his fasting for 40 years, to counteract this issue. He fasted with the intent to protect the city from a decree of destruction, which is a form of kindness for the city. It's a type of tzedakah. His great righteousness contrasted and thereby highlighted Marta's wickedness greatly. Right? The more of a bigger tzaddik you have in the room, the more obvious the rasha becomes. That's the idea here. They were polar opposites, and thus it was fitting that Marta should die from that which gave Rabbi Tzadok life. You see the poetry there? She died from that which gave Rabbi Tzadok life, the dried figs. It saved him, kept him alive 40 years, but it killed her. Why? Because they were complete polar opposites. He gave everything. She gave nothing for the people.
She was considered bad.
Yeah, according to these commentators, they're explaining that she must have deserved this terrible fate. And the reason is, presumably, because she was so wealthy and she didn't use the wealth properly. Okay, now we're entering the Chatzar Yosef portion. I don't know if we'll finish it today, but let's see how much we can get done. Page 87, Chatzar Yosef. Some of our questions are yet unanswered. Let us explain the missing links. Regarding the strange behavior of Marta bat Baitos's messenger, not buying whatever best quality of grain was available at the market each time he arrived there, right? No one answered that. It seems that Marta was very particular to only purchase the best available food on the marketplace, even at a time of raging famine and crisis.
But I have a dispute to that.
A question or a dispute?
A dispute. So you're saying that it seems that she was trying to get the best available food. That's why she asked for it and nothing else.
Yes.
But if that is not there, automatically something else is the best option.
Keep reading.
You get what I mean?
I have an answer for that. Keep reading. She clung to her elevated socioeconomic status for as long as she possibly could. Furthermore, as the Iyun Yaakov and the En Eliyahu concede, she was stingy with her wealth. In fact, this can be derived directly from the verse Devarim 28:56, which our Gemara connects precisely to her, as it says, "The tender and delicate woman among you will turn selfish against her husband of her bosom and against her son of her daughter and daughter, due to the intense poverty." Right? That's what the end of the verse says. That she's going to be so selfish even against the people of her own family. If she would turn selfish against her own family, then all the more so she would turn selfish against the brethren of her city, her not immediate family. Thus, her messenger, based on her history of selfishness and, this is a big word, persnickety. Mike, look that one up. He knew that she only authorized him to purchase that which his mistress commanded explicitly, meaning he knows who her master is. He knows that when she tells me to buy X, because that's what's available on the marketplace, I have to only buy this. If I come back with anything else, she's going to kill me. That's it. But even if I take the one level down and say this is what was available, she's going to say, "But I told you to get the other thing. If that was the only thing, you should have asked me before you bought something else."
But why didn't she tell him automatically?
That was her personality. That's not what he told her. What do you mean? You're asking. I can't answer.
No, if that after the second time, where it really happened, where it was not available.
Yes.
If this thing that I'm asking for is not available, please get the next best available.
So you're saying, why didn't she spell it out for him? Yes. Why didn't she tell him, listen, if this is not there, get the next available thing? Why didn't she say that?
Exactly.
So that's a very good question. What did you think that makes sense for her to say that? You know why she didn't say that? Because of this thing I just wrote right here. She clung to her elevated status. Saying that would be succumbing. Would be, just get me whatever. I can't take it anymore. She didn't want to give that up.
She didn't want to admit it.
She didn't want to admit her misery. She didn't want to admit the fact that she's needy. You understand?
Okay.
That's the depth. That's psychology 101. Exactly. She held on to her pride as long as she could. Okay? If it was so that she would have accepted whatever was available, then she would have made it verbally clear that she was willing to take whatever the best available quality was once he got to the market. Instead, the text of the Gemara says that every time the messenger came back and said, "There is so-and-so available in the market," she replied simply, "Bring it to me." Yeah, that's what's there? Okay, bring me that. Thereby limiting her command to a messenger that he bring her exactly what she replied to and not any other thing. Okay, basically what we explained. I agree with myself, Baruch Hashem. It seems we may derive some hints. So now we're going to tread a little bit deeper. We could derive some hints here from the names of the 4 types of flour that our Gemara speaks of, which were in descending order of quality the following: Semida, Chivarta, Gushkara, Kimcha de Sa'are, which means fine flour, ordinary flour, coarse flour, and barley flour. The first letters in Hebrew of these 4 terms spell the phrase Chag Sak. Chag means a holiday, and Sak means sackcloth. Sackcloth is something that mourners wear. When they're mourning the passing of someone in their family, they wear. It's called sackcloth. This like dirty, unclean, dark garment.
I thought they wear whatever they wear.
At the time, they used to wear specific. Used to have specific mourning clothes. This dichotomy. So this is two opposite things. Holiday, Chag is a holiday, and Sak is like mourning, the opposite of a holiday. This dichotomy hints at the following: despite the fact that her brethren were trapped within the city for 3 years, suffering greatly, with the proverbial sackcloth of mourning on their heads, she was still trying to maintain her lofty noble status and only acquire food fitting for a lavish holiday. She was still trying to have a holiday. The opposite of what's happening around her. Alternatively, these letters also spell, right, the first letters of each one of those 4 types of flour, Chok Gas. Chok means a statute, a law. And Gas means arrogance. Hinting at the fact that her wealth triggered her arrogance on the matter as a chok. Meaning she treated it as a chok, like, I've got to have what I got to have. I've got to have the best. What's a chok? A chok is a type of law in the Torah that we can't fully explain logically. It just is what it is. For example, the famous one is para aduma, the laws of the red heifer, the red cow. Like, the guy who sprinkles it becomes tameh, but he's making the other guy tahor. And so many other steps and ash and why. It's hard to understand. It's very deep things. That's called chok. She treated her need to be on a high level, high status, as a chok, which is a type of statute in Torah that cannot be explained according to ordinary logic. She refused to give charity, despite her great wealth, which is behavior that cannot be explained logically. Also, both of these behaviors, trying to act in a celebratory fashion while everyone else is mourning, and acting irrationally arrogant, contributed to the buildup of the extreme contrast between her and Rabbi Tzadok, as explained by the Iyun Yaakov, and as we shall expand further below. They were two opposite people. Rabbi Tzadok and her. That's why the Gemara speaks about them in this way. Now we're going to go even one level deeper to explain another depth behind these 4 types of flour. It seems there is a deep mystical hint that these 4 types of flour are alluding to. In the deeper wisdom, it is taught that Hashem created existence in a propagative, which means step by step, funnel-like structure, such that Hashem's infinite state sits at the very top, and the physical world that we occupy sits at the very bottom. The entire structure is categorized into what are called the 4 worlds, Arba Olamot, 4 major categories of existences, of worlds, from there down to us. Each with its own distinct name and properties. From highest to lowest, these 4 worlds are called, the top one is called Atzilut. The second one is called Beriyah, which means creation. Third one is called Yetzirah, which means formation. Fourth one is called Asiyah, which means action. Look at note 1. We're going to try to explain the first one, which is called Atzilut. Note 1 on the bottom says, it is very difficult to properly translate this word, Atzilut. In modern Hebrew, it is used to mean nobility, aristocracy, lordship, But in the mystical sense, it refers to the place where the lights of the Sefirot, that we love to speak about all the time, 10 Sefirot, they first shine there, and they begin to propagate down towards the lower worlds from there. The imperative form of the word is the leha atzil, right? To do it is called leha atzil, which means to delegate or to impart or even to inspire. It has many different translations. Thus, Atzilut is where the purest form of the Sefirot are situated. That's the first emanation of the Sefirot, in Atzilut. The first shining of those lights from God's infinity. Because remember, we'll talk about this more later. But when we say God's infinity, it means His oneness. His oneness means that all possible things that could ever be exist at the same time in one space, as it were. There's no space. The space is infinite. That's so hard to, it's beyond our mind to explain it. The world of Atzilut is the first world below that infinite oneness, and it's where the first separation into separate things starts to happen. Those separate things are those separate lights. 10 lights, 10 Sefirot, 10 emanations, 10 powers, 10 midot. Right? Same idea. So that's where it happens in Atzilut. And from there, from Atzilut, those 10 lights shine further through more prisms and lenses to the next world below, which is Beriah. And then those lights, they're much more now. And when you shine a light through a lens, it starts to refract and bend. And sometimes if you shine through a prism, it spreads out. If you shine white light through a prism, it spreads out into the 7 different colors of the 7 light of the visible light spectrum. Roy G. Biv, right? So that's what happens. There's gates between these worlds, and each gate is like a prism and like a mirror, so to speak. Again, this is all parables. Well, these energies and lights get bent and warped and expanded and opened up, and that keeps happening until you get down to our last world, which is Asiyah, which manifests as the world as we see it. Everything has spiritual energy and light inside it. That was reflected originally from the original point of God's infinite oneness. All the steps up. Okay? Good. Let's go further over here in the Chatzar, Yosef. Why am I talking about this? What does that have to do with flour? I'll tell you in a second. The highest place within Atzilut is Keter. Okay? Keter is the first of the 10 Sefirot. Keter is the closest place to God's unfathomable infinite state and the lowest of the 4 worlds, which is Asiyah, is where we reside. Right? So I just explained that much more before. Movement downwards from the top to the bottom, further and further from Keter, correlates with more and more condensing into physical reality. Right? All the way up there is spiritual lights. Lights are spiritual. By definition, they can't hold them. They're not solid. The more those lights start to refract and bend and expand, as we explained, through all those reflections, it gets harder and more physical and more condensed until you have the physical world that we live in. Movement upwards, however, along the trail correlates with brighter and more refined spirituality. It seems that these 4 levels of flour in our Gemara correlate to the 4 worlds, because it's all an analogy of refinement versus coarseness. You understand? Fine flour, which is the highest level flour that she first sent her agent to go get, that correlates with Atzilut, the first of the 4 worlds, the purest and most refined. Ordinary flour correlates with Beriah, coarse flour with Yetzirah, and then barley flour with Asiyah. Wheat flour compared to the other 3 grains, right? The first 3 are wheat. Wheat flour compared to the other grains is of the highest quality and importance, unlike barley, which is commonly used as animal fodder, we explained before. In fact, there are special offerings of grain that the Torah commands to be offered at the time the temple stood. There's many different korbanot, sacrifices. Some of them require flour. A barley offering called Korban HaOmer is given on the 2nd day of Pesach. That's when the Sfirat HaOmer starts. Omer means a bundle. A bundle of what? Barley flour. That's when the ripening of the barley flour happens. That's what we're praising God for. And at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, they used to go and there's a whole ceremony that they used to harvest the barley flour bundles and do a whole and burn it on the temple.
Is this where Kemach Hashan comes from?
Yes, Kemach Hashan is connected to this idea. Because once that happens, once the korban is of the, it's a machlokes, is it the korban or is it the day itself? We rule that it's the day itself. Once the day itself comes along, the 2nd day of Pesach, when you would do the Omer offering, Kemach Chadash, new flour that was up to that point, all new flour, all flour that was, or all wheat, all grains that was harvested up to that point becomes allowed to be eaten. Any flour, any grain that grows after that point, 2nd day of Pesach, is only allowed on the next 2nd day of Pesach, the year after.
The Ashkenazim, they don't follow Kemach Hashan only because we don't live in Israel?
I don't want to get into a halachic thing about Kemach Hashan. It's very deep and complicated. Look it up. I think Rabbi Elbaz has a very good lecture on it as well. But say that for later. So, barley flour called, there's an offering for the barley flour we just spoke about called the Korban HaOmer, is given on the 2nd day of Pesach. The first day of the counting of the Omer. And a wheat offering is given on the festival of Shavuot. There's also a wheat offering there. It's called Shti Alechem. Wheat offering. That's when the wheat would harvest, about a month and a half later. 49 days later, right? And that had to be sacrificed on Shavuot, the day that completes the 50-day cycle of the Omer. Pesach commemorates the exodus from Egypt, while Shavuot commemorates the receiving of the Torah from Hashem at Sinai. This teaches that before receiving the Torah, man is no better than animal. And so barley, animal fodder, is offered. Only after receiving the Torah, 50 days later, can man become a refined and intellectual and moral entity. And so wheat, the food of man, as intended, is offered then. You understand? Similarly, in our Gemara, fine, ordinary, and coarse flour are all levels of refinement of wheat flour. Those first three types are wheat. And all three correspond to one of the upper three worlds, as we explained, which is more spiritual. Which is, Atzilut, B'riyah, Yetzirah. The upper three worlds are primarily spiritual in nature. Only the world of Asiyah, our world that we live in, is the world of condensed physicality. And so it is fitting that Asiyah is represented in our Gemara by barley flour, a different and lower species altogether than the wheat. It all fits. You don't look moved. Baruch Hashem. So now, as the Maharal pointed out, this episode of the fine flour was divinely ordained. What was the message? At that moment, just as no flour was to be found, neither was mercy for the Jewish nation to be found anywhere along the physical, spiritual structure of creation encapsulated by those four worlds that we're describing. There was no flour to be found, right? Same thing here. There was no salvation to be found. There was no decree, no zechut to help them.
What could have reversed this?
Nothing. That's the point.
How? God is
I can't answer. You're asking me to go into God's database and ask God, how can we have stopped it? It's very simple. Don't have sinat chinam. Division, no division. Be unified. Help each other grow.
You said you can't answer the question.
Then answer the question. That's what happens. It wasn't me. That's what happens. You think you can know the answer, but then when you get in a lecture, you get siyata d'shmaya. Hashem just opens your mouth to say the right things. That's how it works. I should be a little more patient next time, you say. Okay, so the decree for the destruction of the temple had been sealed and stamped from all the way on high. And it was in the process of being delivered down to the world of Asiyah. Once the messenger informed that not even barley flour was available in the market. In the deepest sense, it meant that the decree had descended through all the worlds, all four, and finally arrived at the world of Asiyah. And its missive, which means its mission, was on the cusp of becoming actuality. That was the depth of this Gemara, in my personal opinion, my humble opinion, why the Chachamim gave us this whole paragraph explaining this back and forth of the four flowers. Okay, we have a few more minutes. We can do this one next paragraph, or we can start it at least. Page 89.
Can we read?
You want to read? Should I give you the microphone? Come, please, by all means. I would love to hear you read. Now to tackle the issue of the redundancy in Rabbi Tzadok's dried figs. We're trying to figure this out. What does it mean, dried figs? How can one suck juice out of figs that have already been dried? Rather, it seems that our Gemara is an example of Chazal using metaphoric language to say what they really mean. He would suck out their liquid and cast the rest away, the Gemara said. This means that when Rabbi Tzadok dealt with other people, he was able to extract what was good and nourishing from within them, the juice from within a person, even if they were already dry, with almost nothing spiritually positive to offer or derive. He still delved deep and was able to suck out whatever tiny amount of positive juice each person had to offer, bringing out their best in this way. That was what he was so good at. He cast the rest away. What does it mean? He sucked and cast the rest away. It means that he would discard the negative qualities within them. Didn't pay attention so much. In this way, Rabbi Tzadok emulated the attribute of chesed. That's what chesed does, by the way. That's what chesed is all about. Which is defined by going beyond the letter of the law. Not being exacting to the T, you get what you deserve. He was beyond that. Giving more than what is deserved. He went out to far reaches to find merit within even the worst kinds of people. And in return, he succeeded in that Hashem was beyond the letter of the law with the people as well. Meaning they deserved the destruction immediately. But the decree was delayed for 40 years as long as Rabbi Tzadok fasted. Look at note number 4. In the end, the momentum behind the decree of the destruction was too strong, and the destruction happened anyway. Nevertheless, Rabbi Tzadok's efforts were not for naught. For one must assume that his merit contributed to the minor salvation that did happen. What was that minor salvation? That was done by Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and it's going to be a huge, amazing chapter 9, to see how he was able to save Yerushalayim to a degree. Sorry.
So he fasted for 40 years.
Yes, and it must be that it didn't go for nothing. I'm saying, I think it helped out. It makes sense to say that.
In those 40 years, the temple was not destroyed.
Yeah.
Once he stopped fasting, the temple was destroyed.
It doesn't say that exactly, because what's going to happen is, the Romans are going to break through and destroy. So it was 40 years of time.
No, it was delayed.
Delayed, yeah. It doesn't mean it was delayed, meaning
I know it's still going to happen.
Yeah.
So it was delayed by 40 years for every year that he fasted.
Sure.
If he fasted,
I don't know when he stopped fasting.
If he fasted 41 years, would it be delayed enough?
I don't know. That's conjecture. I don't know. Let's see. He was the class. So we're talking about Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Tzadok was the class of Avraham Avinu, the pillar of Chesed, who supplicated, prayed for sparing the terribly wicked city of Sodom. Remember, for the sake of the tiniest merit that may have existed inside the city. Remember, he was negotiating with God. God, what if there's 50 tzaddikim in the city? What if there's 45? What if there's 40, 30, 20, 10? He was trying to grab onto anything, whatever juice the city had to offer, right? Same idea here. Abraham avidly served gourmet cow tongue, we spoke about that as well, and mustard to guests who appeared to him as idolaters of the desert. Same thing, potato. Right? Who worshipped the dust of their feet. This is all in the Rashi's in Parashat Lech Lecha. Look over there. Despite the excruciating pain he was experiencing because it was the 3rd day of the circumcision surgery he just did, that he performed himself no less. He did it himself when he was that old. You see this guy? He's a pillar of chesed. This guy, he had people walking by him who looked like idol worshippers. He offered them top of the line food, meat, while in extreme pain on a very hot day. Why? Chesed. I want to suck whatever good juice they have. I want to try to bring them to God. That was Rabbi Tzadok. And we'll see next week more how that was different than Martabat Betos. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen.